Why do humans fear death? One of the most fundamental questions of human existence is about death. From the moment we are born, we are walking toward death. All living beings eventually face death, but only humans are conscious of their own death, give meaning to it, and fear it. Today we will explore the roots of this universal and profound fear, how we live with this fear, and perhaps how we can transcend it. Chapter 1: The Nature of Death and Human Perception. What is death? Simply put, death is the end of life. Breathing stops, the heart ceases to beat, and brain activity ends. But for humans, death is more than just a biological phenomenon. Death means the end of existence, a farewell to everything known, entering an unknown realm, or complete annihilation. Interestingly, humans are known to be the only creatures that recognize the fact that they will someday die. This consciousness of death is both a blessing and a curse. We seek meaning in life because we know about death, but we also experience profound existential anxiety because of this knowledge. All humans die. Socrates is human. Therefore, Socrates dies. This ancient Greek syllogism logically explains the universality of death. While we understand this logic, it is emotionally difficult to accept. The thought "I will someday not exist" still evokes fear deep within us. In some ways, it's quite ironic. We were in a state of non-existence before we were born, but we don't feel fear about that. Yet, non-existence after death causes extreme fear. Epicurus pointed out this asymmetrical attitude, saying, "Death is nothing to us. When we exist, death is not present, and when death arrives, we do not exist." This argument is logically correct, but emotionally difficult to accept. In modern society, death is often concealed and distant. In the past, people died at home surrounded by family, but today, most deaths occur in hospitals or nursing facilities. We have fewer opportunities to directly witness death, which has made death more unfamiliar and frightening. Conversations about death are taboo, and symbols that remind us of death are considered ominous. But the more we distance ourselves from death, paradoxically, the more it grows as a greater fear within us. Just as a monster imagined in the dark is scarier than a real monster, death that we do not face becomes more terrifying in our imagination. Cynically speaking, we end up trapped deeper under the shadow of death while trying to avoid it. Chapter 2: Death. Fear as an instinctive fear. One of the most basic human instincts is the survival instinct. Every cell in our body, every system, is designed to maintain life. The heart beats without rest, the lungs supply oxygen, and the immune system protects the body from external threats. These biological mechanisms focus on maintaining life, so death means the failure of all these systems. From an evolutionary perspective, fear of death helps with survival. Organisms that fear death are more likely to avoid dangers and make choices favorable to survival. Throughout human history, humans who feared death avoided predators, didn't eat toxic plants, and refrained from dangerous behavior. These characteristics contributed to the survival and prosperity of our species. However, human fear of death goes beyond simple survival instinct. Other animals also detect danger and try to avoid death. But because they have limited symbolic thinking or ability to predict the future, they don't conceptualize or fear death itself like we do. Humans are the only beings that recognize their own mortality and can think about it abstractly. Interestingly, fear of death doesn't always appear with the same intensity. In dangerous situations, we experience extreme survival instinct. Adrenaline is secreted, heart rate increases, and fight or flight response is activated. But when thinking about death in a calm state, we feel a different kind of anxiety: existential anxiety. Psychologist Ernest Becker, in his book The Denial of Death, argued that all human cultural activities are fundamentally attempts to overcome the fear of death. We try to create something that transcends our finite existence through art, literature, religion, science, etc. From a cynical perspective, human great achievements might just be very complicated methods to soothe the fear of death. In this context, modern consumerism can also be seen as a product of death fear. Constantly buying things, accumulating experiences, and pursuing pleasure distract us from the reality of death. The attitude, "I'll die later, but now I'm going to buy this new smartphone," is one way to temporarily alleviate death anxiety. Chapter 3: The Psychological Dimension of Death Fear. Fear of death consists of several psychological elements. The most fundamental element is anxiety about the unknown. Humans find it difficult to tolerate uncertainty. We have a strong desire to find patterns, predict, and control. But death is the ultimate unknown territory. No person has ever completely known the experience after death and returned. Psychoanalyst Sigmund Freud pointed out that we cannot actually imagine our own death. When thinking about death, we always imagine as observers, like watching our own funeral or witnessing the grief of loved ones. This is because our minds cannot accept complete non-existence. Another psychological fear about death is about the dissolution of the self. We build identity, relationships, memories, achievements throughout life. Death means the end of all these, which causes extreme anxiety. When the question, "Who am I?" meets the answer, "I will disappear," we experience deep existential fear. An interesting fact here is that fear of death changes with age. Generally, young adults feel the strongest anxiety about death, while older people tend to accept death more peacefully. This may be because older people have already achieved many goals, formed relationships, and more deeply accepted the finitude of life. Also, fear of death is often confused with fear of the process of dying. Many people fear pain, dependency, loss of dignity in the dying process more than death itself. This is especially true in modern medicine, which can extend life but does not always guarantee quality of life. From a cynical perspective, our society worships youth and health, while deliberately ignoring the fact that they are temporary states that will inevitably disappear for everyone. Anti-aging products, plastic surgery, and all kinds of marketing promising eternal youth reflect our collective denial of death. We know we cannot avoid death, yet we act as if it were optional. Chapter 4: Death Concepts in Culture and Religion. Throughout human history, all cultures and religions have developed systems to give meaning to death and manage death anxiety. These systems serve to reduce human fundamental anxiety by providing explanations for death, forming beliefs about existence after death, and establishing rituals for facing death and mourning. Ancient Egyptians developed an elaborate belief system about the afterlife. They believed that the souls of the dead traveled through the underworld called Duat, and ultimately received judgment. For this journey, they prepared mummification, tomb construction, and objects to be buried with the dead. Pyramids can be considered the ultimate expression of these afterlife beliefs. The traditional Eastern perspective views death as part of a cycle. The concept of reincarnation in Hinduism and Buddhism reinterprets death not as an end, but as a new beginning. From this perspective, the current life is just one among countless cycles of life and death. The concept of reincarnation alleviates death anxiety by denying the finality of death. Abrahamic religions, namely Judaism, Christianity, and Islam understand death around the concept of the immortality of the soul and final judgment. In these religions, earthly life is considered a preparation period for eternal afterlife. Death is the end of the body, but the soul continues to exist and can ultimately expect resurrection or eternal life in heaven. In Christianity especially, the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ is a key element in overcoming the fear of death. Paul declares in 1 Corinthians 15:55, "O death, where is your victory? O death, where is your sting?" Swinging that death has been conquered through Christ. Even in secular modern society, cultural rituals and customs related to death remain important. Funerals, memorial services, and cemetery visits provide important opportunities to accept death and express grief. These rituals locate individual death within the context of community, enabling people to find meaning in death and share the pain of loss together. Interestingly, even in modern secular society, the desire for immortality is expressed in various forms. Attempts at life extension through science and technology, cryopreservation, digital immortality, etc., can be seen as modern variations of the traditional religious concept of immortality. Cynically speaking, we may have abandoned belief in God, but the desire to overcome death remains powerful. We've just chosen cryocapsules and cloud storage instead of heaven. From a religious perspective, it's noteworthy that most religions attribute essential meaning to death. Death is interpreted not as a simple biological end, but as an important transition point in the spiritual journey. This attribution of meaning plays an important role in alleviating the fear of death. When death is meaningless and unreasonable, fear is maximized. But when death has purpose and meaning, we can accept it more peacefully. Chapter 5. The positive aspects of recognizing death. Awareness of death doesn't just bring fear and anxiety. Paradoxically, acknowledging our finitude can make life richer and more meaningful. Let's look at the positive aspects of being conscious of death. First, awareness of death gives life urgency and focus. If we think our time is unlimited, it's easy to put off important things. But when we accept that our lives are finite, every moment becomes precious. Steve Jobs said, "Death is probably life's greatest invention. It is the agent of change. It clears out the old to make way for the new." 16th century Mexican monks routinely used the phrase memento mori, meaning remember death. They used skulls as objects of meditation and were always conscious of their mortality. This practice helped them live spiritually faithful each day as if it were their last. Second, awareness of death clarifies our priorities. Hospice nurse Bronnie Ware, who worked with many dying patients, recorded what dying people regret most. They mainly regretted working too much, not expressing their true feelings, and not spending enough time with loved ones. When looking at life through the lens of death, we can see more clearly what is truly important. Third, awareness of death deepens gratitude. If everything were eternal, we would take their value for granted. But when we know that every moment, every relationship, every experience is temporary, we value them more. The Japanese concept of mono no aware describes the aesthetics of finding beauty in the impermanence of things. Cherry blossoms are beautiful because they don't last long. Fourth, awareness of death promotes existential growth. Philosopher Martin Heidegger argued that to become an authentic being, one must face one's own death. A life that avoids death easily becomes superficial and shallow, but someone who has accepted their finitude can live in a deeper and more meaningful way. From a somewhat cynical perspective, all human achievements and greatness might have been born under the shadow of death. If we lived forever, would Shakespeare have needed to write plays? Would Beethoven have rushed to complete symphonies? Would Einstein have strived to uncover the secrets of the universe? Death gives us a deadline. And as every writer knows, without a deadline, no work is completed. Furthermore, awareness of death helps us connect more deeply with others. The recognition that we all share the same fate is a powerful equalizing factor. Regardless of power, wealth, or fame, all humans eventually meet the same end. This recognition teaches humility and focuses on common experiences as humans. The Bible teaches in Ecclesiastes 7:2, "It is better to go to a house of mourning than to go to a house of feasting, for death is the destiny of everyone. The living should take this to heart." This means that meditating on death teaches us wisdom and helps us understand deeper truths of life. Chapter 6. Death Fear and Mental Health. Fear of death is a normal and universal experience, but when this fear becomes too strong, it can negatively affect mental health. Thanatophobia refers to a state where strong anxiety or fear about death or the dying process becomes serious enough to interfere with daily life. Death fear is associated with various mental health issues. Anxiety disorders, panic attacks, obsessive-compulsive disorder, depression, etc., can appear with excessive worry about death. Some people develop various avoidance mechanisms to avoid thinking about death, such as excessive activity, substance abuse, and risky behavior. Spiritual crisis or existential crisis is also deeply related to death anxiety. Failing to find meaning in life or uncertainty about existence after death can cause serious psychological distress. Philosopher Kierkegaard called this state the sickness unto death. Modern psychology offers various approaches to cope with death anxiety. Cognitive behavioral therapy can help identify and change irrational thoughts about death. Mindfulness and meditation are effective in focusing on the present moment and reducing excessive worry from death anxiety. Viktor Frankl, the founder of meaning-centered therapy, argued that discovering meaning in life is key to overcoming existential anxiety. Through his experience in Nazi concentration camps, he observed that people with purpose in life were more likely to survive even in the most extreme situations. According to psychologist Ernest Becker's terror management theory, humans manage death anxiety through cultural worldviews and self-esteem. We counter the arbitrariness and meaninglessness of death through systems of meaning and values. Meanwhile, testimonies of people who have come close to death experience provide important insights into our understanding of death. Many people who report near-death experiences describe similar experiences such as peacefulness, journey to light, reunion with loved ones. These reports have not been fully explained scientifically, but provide comfort to many people about the possibility of existence after death. From a cynical perspective, some approaches in modern psychology simply attempt to manage or suppress death anxiety, treating death as if it were a disease to be cured. But death may not be an enemy to conquer, but an ultimate truth to be integrated as part of life. Or, borrowing the words of philosopher Heidegger, death is a catalyst that leads us from inauthenticity to authenticity. From a mental health perspective, what's important is finding a balance between healthy awareness of death and pathological fear. Neither completely denying death nor being overly obsessed with it is healthy. Instead, we should find a way to acknowledge the reality of death without letting it overwhelm life. The Bible speaks to this in Psalm 90 verse 12. Teach us to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom. This emphasizes that recognizing our finite time is the foundation of a wise life. Also, Hebrews 2:15 teaches that Christ came to free those who all their lives were held in slavery by their fear of death. This suggests that liberation from the fear of death is an important part of faith. Chapter 7. Death rituals in various cultures. From an anthropological perspective, rituals and customs regarding death are surprisingly diverse across cultures. However, within this diversity, all cultures have developed ways to make death meaningful, structure the grieving process, and comfort the community. By examining death rituals in various cultures, we'll see how humanity has dealt with the universal experience of death. The afterlife ritual of Tibetan Buddhism is one of the most elaborate death rituals in the world. The text known as Bardo Thodol, or the Tibetan Book of the Dead, guides the journey from the moment of death to the next reincarnation. Tibetan Buddhists believe that death is a special opportunity to achieve enlightenment, so death rituals function not as simple comfort, but as practical guides for spiritual liberation. Mexico's Day of the Dead shows a unique cultural approach to death. This festival is a celebration to remember and welcome dead family members, characterized by colorful altars, sugar skulls, marigold flowers, and food that the deceased liked. This festival, which accepts death as an opportunity for joy and memory rather than sadness, emphasizes the continuity of death and life. Ghana's fantasy coffin tradition shows another interesting approach to death. This custom, which creates customized coffins reflecting the deceased's profession or passion in the form of airplanes, cars, fish, etc., transforms death into an opportunity to celebrate the individual's life and achievements. These elaborate funerals integrate elements of celebration, even in grief. Hindu cremation rituals emphasize the liberation and circulation of the soul. Cremation performed next to the Ganges River in holy sites like Varanasi allows the soul to escape the constraints of the body and proceed to the next life. The cremation process is public and ritualistic, accepting death not as something to hide, but as a natural part of life. In Jewish tradition, Shiva is a period where family gathers together for 7 days to mourn. During this time, visitors provide comfort, share stories about the deceased, and stay with the bereaved. This communal mourning plays an important role in sharing the pain of loss and strengthening the social support network. In many African cultures, ancestor worship plays an important role. The dead are not considered completely gone, but continue to influence family and community from the spiritual world. The connection between the living and the dead is maintained through regular rituals and offerings. This perspective reinterprets death not as a disconnection, but as a transformation of relationship. Funeral rituals in Western society have also changed over time. The past's public and home-centered death and funeral have gradually become professionalized and institutionalized. Modern Western funerals are often managed through funeral directors, morgues, professional cremation services, etc. However, recently, there has been increasing interest in alternative methods such as natural burial, eco-friendly funeral, and personalized memorial services. From a cynical perspective, the funeral industry in modern Western society is often commodifying death. Expensive coffins, elaborate memorial services, permanent cemeteries, etc., may be ways to capitalize on our anxiety about death. Marketing phrases like, "for the most dignified final journey," or "the best choice for eternal memory," exploit our fear of death. However, what these diverse cultural approaches commonly show is that death is more than a simple biological event. Death is a cultural, social, and spiritual experience, intertwined with concepts of meaning, relationship, continuity, and transcendence. Death rituals are important tools to help the community process loss, remember the dead, and help survivors continue on. In the Bible, we can see several rituals and customs regarding death and mourning. In Genesis 50, Joseph conducts an Egyptian-style funeral for his father Jacob and transports his body to the land of Canaan to be buried with his ancestors. In John 11, Jesus weeps in front of his friend Lazarus' tomb, showing the naturalness and importance of mourning. The Bible doesn't deny or beautify death, but presents a message of hope while acknowledging its reality and impact. Chapter 8: Modern Society and its Relationship with Death. Modern society has a unique relationship with death. On one hand, it has greatly reduced mortality through medical advances, public health improvements, and safety measures. On the other hand, it has separated death from everyday experience and institutionalized it. This dual attitude deeply influences modern people's perception of death. Modern medicine has acquired the ability to treat numerous diseases, extend lifespan, and delay death. Many conditions that were once fatal have now become manageable chronic diseases. This means that death is no longer an everyday and predictable event as before, but is increasingly concentrated in old age and occurs within medical environments. However, despite these advances, death remains inevitable. French philosopher Philippe Ariès, in his book Western Attitudes Toward Death, explains how modern society has gradually hidden and tabooized death. According to him, death was once a public and domestic experience, but as the 20th century began, it gradually moved to hospitals and nursing homes. In modern society, death is often considered a failure. Doctors are trained to prevent patient death, and families are encouraged to take all measures for life extension. This attitude reconstructs death not as a natural process, but as a problem to overcome. As a result, many people experience an extended dying process rather than a peaceful and dignified death. Simultaneously, modern media is filled with images of death. Death is a common theme in news, movies, video games, TV shows, etc. However, these representations often depict death as dramatic, violent, and unrealistic. This creates a disconnect with the actual experience of death and forms distorted expectations about death. The advent of the digital age has opened new dimensions of death and mourning. Social media has changed the experience of death through digital memorial spaces, virtual cemeteries, and online profiles that remain after death. Some services allow management of social media accounts after death, or conversations with the deceased through artificial intelligence. This enables the new concept of digital immortality. From a cynical perspective, it could be said that technology companies are now monetizing even our death. New business models have emerged that exploit death anxiety with phrases like, "Preserve your digital legacy," "Be remembered forever," and we're willing to pay for these services. In fact, these digital monuments might not be much different from pyramids or tombstones of the past, just a new form of pursuit of immortality. Another characteristic of modern society is the growth of palliative care and the hospice movement. These approaches focus on the quality of life for people in terminal conditions and accept death as a natural part of human experience. This provides an important alternative perspective to modern medicine's war against death. Recent social movements like the death positivity movement encourage more open conversations about death. Death cafes, death education programs, workshops for creating advanced medical directives, etc., help demystify death and help individuals prepare for their end more consciously. However, from a biblical perspective, what's important is that although death is an unavoidable reality, it's not the last word. 1 Corinthians 15:55-57 declares, "O death, where is your victory? O death, where is your sting? But thanks be to God, He gives us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. This shows that Christian hope extends beyond death. Chapter 9. Philosophical Reflections on Death. Throughout human history, philosophers have deeply contemplated the nature and meaning of death. These philosophical inquiries have had significant influence in shaping our understanding and attitudes toward death. Let's examine how death has been understood in various philosophical traditions. Ancient Greek philosopher Epicurus presented one of the most famous arguments about death. Death is nothing to us. When we exist, death is not present, and when death arrives, we do not exist. According to this view, it is irrational to fear death itself because we never experience our own death. Socrates taught that philosophy is practice for death. He believed that true wisdom comes from a state of not fearing death. His student Plato went further and argued for the immortality of the soul. In Plato's dialogue Phaedo, Socrates describes death as the moment when the soul is liberated from the constraints of the body. In Eastern philosophy, we find different perspectives on death. Laozi, the founder of Taoism, saw death as a natural part of cosmic circulation. His saying, "When a person is born, death has already begun," emphasizes the inseparable connection between life and death. Confucius placed more emphasis on how to live than on death. How can one know death when one doesn't yet know life? Buddhist philosophy emphasizes the concept of impermanence, the fact that everything changes and disappears. Death is not a strange event to be feared, but the natural state of all existence. The Buddhist practice of Maranasati, or meditation on death, encourages practitioners to live more faithfully in the present by deeply recognizing their mortality. Modern existentialist philosophy has a deep relationship with death. Heidegger described death as the possibility of impossibility as a possibility of being. According to him, awareness of death is an essential condition for us to become an authentic being. Other existentialists like Sartre and Camus also argued that recognition of finitude is the foundation of a meaningful life. Simone de Beauvoir critically analyzed how modern society deals with aging and death in her book The Coming of Age. She pointed out how the elderly are often othered and how their experiences and deaths become invisible. This is a powerful critique of how modern society alienates death. From a cynical perspective, all the beautiful theories of philosophers about death might be elaborate defense mechanisms to rationalize their own fear of death. Epicurus's claim that death is nothing might have come about because death was actually too big of something for him. After all, philosophers are human too. However, this philosophical thinking becomes an important tool for us to understand death more deeply and develop a healthier relationship with it. Philosophy provides us with a lens to view death not simply as a biological event, but as a human experience filled with meaning and value. The Bible presents a different perspective from philosophical traditions. Ecclesiastes deeply reflects on the finitude and transience of human existence in 12:13, but ultimately reaches the conclusion, "Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind." From the biblical perspective, death is not the final destination, but a passage to the eternal world. In John 11:25-26, Jesus declares, "I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die, and whoever lives by believing in me will never die." Chapter 10. Developing a healthy attitude toward death. So far, we have examined the nature of death, the source of death fear, cultural responses, and philosophical perspectives. Now, based on this understanding, let's explore how we can develop a healthier and more integrated attitude toward death. The first step of a healthy attitude toward death is acknowledgement. Death is an unavoidable reality. It's important to accept this fact, not just intellectually, but emotionally as well. Many spiritual traditions encourage regularly facing this truth through practices like memento mori, remember death. Second, having conversations about death can help. In modern society, death is often a taboo subject, but talking about it openly can reduce fear and develop deeper understanding. Sharing your death-related wishes, funeral preferences, and philosophical thoughts about the end of life with family or friends can create meaningful connections. Third, practical preparation can reduce anxiety about death. Actions like writing a will, preparing advance medical directives, establishing funeral plans can reduce emotional burden and provide clear guidance to loved ones. This preparation can transform death into an act of love. It's a way of caring for others even after you're gone. Fourth, invest in precious relationships. One of the things many terminal patients regret most is not spending more time with loved ones. Building and maintaining meaningful relationships provides great comfort when facing death. Also, genuine connection with others partially fulfills the desire for immortality. We continue to exist in the memories and lives of others. Fifth, explore spiritual resources. Whether religious beliefs, philosophical perspectives, or meditation practices, spirituality provides important tools for facing the mystery of death. Many spiritual traditions have dealt with the problem of death for thousands of years and offer wisdom to overcome this fear. Sixth, develop meaning and purpose in life. Psychiatrist Viktor Frankl argued that finding meaning in life is key to overcoming death anxiety. When we have purpose in life, death becomes less threatening. This purpose can take various forms, such as religious calling, dedication to family, artistic expression, pursuit of social justice, etc. Seventh, focus on the present. Mindfulness and the ability to be fully present in the current moment help reduce death anxiety. Instead of being caught up in regrets about the past or worries about the future, when we live faithfully here and now, we experience a richer life. Eighth, think about your legacy. Creating something that will remain after you're gone, whether an artwork, charity, memoir, or simply the positive impact you've had on others' lives, can change the meaning of death. Legacy gives us the feeling that we continue to exist in some form. Ninth, pursue completeness in life. Unfinished business, unresolved relationships, unexpressed emotions are major causes of regret in the face of death. Trying to live as if today were your last day makes life more fulfilling, no matter how much time is left. 10th, embrace the wisdom of death. Death can be the ultimate teacher. It teaches us what is truly important, what is merely a temporary concern, and how to cherish every moment of life. From a cynical perspective, developing a healthy attitude toward death might ironically be the secret to living the most fulfilling life. Most people try to feel alive by not thinking about death, but the opposite is actually true. When we truly recognize death, we finally feel truly alive. The Bible provides the foundation for a healthy perspective on death. Psalm 39, 4-5 says, "Show me, Lord, my life's end and the number of my days. Let me know how fleeting my life is. You have made my days a mere handbreadth. The span of my years is as nothing before you." This emphasizes the importance of recognizing and accepting our finitude. But the Bible also presents hope beyond death. Revelation 21:4 promises, "He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away." From this perspective, death is not the last word, but a new beginning. Conclusion: the dance of death and life. Concluding our journey about death, we arrive at a paradoxical truth. Our attitude toward death ultimately reflects our attitude toward life. How we see death determines how we live life. Death can be both the greatest fear and the greatest teacher of our human existence. It confronts us with the reality of finitude, while reminding us of the preciousness of each moment. Death is the only certainty we cannot control, and in this paradox, we discover the deep meaning of life. It is natural to fear death. It is deeply rooted in our biological survival instinct and desire for self-preservation. But living overwhelmed by this fear limits the richness of life. When we accept death and develop a peaceful relationship with it, we experience true freedom. All great spiritual traditions have recognized that death is life's teacher. When viewed through the lens of death, what is truly important becomes clear. Temporary values like money, power, fame lose their light, and eternal values like love, connection, meaning, beauty come to the forefront. Death also teaches us humility. It reminds us that all our plans, aspirations, achievements are ultimately beyond our complete control. This humility liberates us from self-centered illusions and leads to the experience of being part of something greater. The Bible says in Isaiah 55:8-9, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." This acknowledges the limited understanding of humans in front of profound mysteries like death, while implying that there is a greater purpose and plan beyond. In the end, the question about death returns to the question about the meaning of life. The question, why do we fear death, is inseparably connected to the question, how can we live meaningfully? Under the shadow of death, we are challenged to live the most faithful, most courageous, most loving life. I hope that as you listen to this audiobook, you reflect on your attitude toward your own death and think about how it affects your life. It is natural to fear death, but being captivated by that fear is not inevitable. We can acknowledge death, give it meaning, and live peacefully with it. In 1 Corinthians 15:54-55, Apostle Paul declares, "When the perishable has been clothed with the imperishable, and the mortal with immortality, then the saying that is written will come true. Death has been swallowed up in victory. Where, O death, is your victory? Where, O death, is your sting?" This shows that while the Bible acknowledges the reality of death, it conveys a message of hope that death is not the last word. Thank you sincerely for taking this journey with me. Understanding death is a lifelong process, and today's exploration is just the beginning. We will continue to provide more content on such profound topics in the future, so please subscribe to our YouTube channel not to miss the latest updates. Press the subscribe button and set up notifications to receive alerts whenever a new audiobook is uploaded. Your support and interest are a great help in delivering these important topics to more people. Thank you again for listening to the end.